move from delay to delivery, ensuring that the Canadian government becomes a catalyst for, not an impediment to, nation-building projects that will supercharge growth in communities both large and small.
One has to be the pipelines. We can't be relying on the U.S. any longer. We have to start building pipelines west, north, and east.
Ontario Premier Doug Ford there, and Prime Minister Mark Carney giving a bit of a preview of that meeting that they're expected to have with all premiers and the Prime Minister in Saskatoon. At the top of the agenda, lowering or removing interprovincial trade barriers as a way of protecting the Canadian economy against the ongoing trade war with the United States. Now, ahead of that meeting, Quebec announced it would do its part by tabling a bill that would open the province's borders to products from other jurisdictions. But does that openness extend to pipelines across Quebec? Well, earlier today, I spoke with Quebec's Minister for the Economy, Christopher Skeete. Minister Skeete, welcome back to Power Play. So great to see you.
Very happy to be with you.
First off, just explain to Canadians how significant of an impact the bill that you introduced today will have. Were there that many restrictions to interprovincial trade within Quebec?
Yeah, you're right to say that it is a significant bill that we presented today. And yes, there were barriers. Even though we've done a really good job over the past few years since the passing of the free trade accord with Canada to reduce those barriers, there were still some barriers that existed. And today we're taking some final steps to really reduce them to the absolute minimum.
I think we understand what the impetus of all of this is, but how open does Quebec want to be to interprovincial trade? And I ask that because we know you are going into this meeting with the Prime Minister and other premiers. And of course, everybody can say that they want to be open about it, but really when the rubber hits the road, everybody will have to make concessions.
Well, just to give you a sense of where we are with our bill basically starts from a posture of anything that can be commercialized or sold in Canada will be able to be sold or commercialized in Quebec unless. So the de facto position that we have is a position of openness. And in certain areas, we're going to give ourselves the right to sort of opt out. But it will really be exceptional in nature as opposed to having a whole framework that sort of indirectly and accidentally blocks, which is what we had before the passing of this bill.
So yeah, I wanted to pick up on that. Your government says that you can't exclude some goods, but you must publish those exemptions online. What types of goods are we talking about? Explain to Canadians, why would you want to exempt them and what would you possibly exempt?
Well, certain exceptions like, for instance, the French language, right? We reserve the right to legislate in matters of language in order to make sure that goods that are sold in Quebec are in French. Other things that are not negotiable here is supply management. That is very important for Quebec farmers, and that's something that we're absolutely committed to. So these are the kinds of things that wouldn't be moved in this bill. But then again, any good commercialized de facto will be available in Quebec, and I think that's a major move for Quebec.
And I understand that supply management, and I do intend this pun here, is the sacred cow in Quebec. But at the same time, when there is the threat of Donald Trump and all of the trade war with the United States, do you not think for the sake of inter-Canadian trade that Quebec should maybe reconsider exactly what it's willing to give up and not in supply management, especially if it's between provinces?
There are certain things for us that are not negotiable. French is one of them. Supply management is another one. There's not even a consensus on supply management throughout Canada. So, of course, I don't think we would do well to focus on that area. I think what Quebecers and Canadians are expecting of legislators in the different provinces, they're expecting us to allow the free flow of goods and to make sure that the goods that are sold in Canada can be sold in Quebec. Now, that doesn't mean that certain agricultural products won't be available in Quebec and that we're not opening in that regard, but supply management for us is really very important.
No, and I understand that point, but if you are saying that supply management is a no-go, then how can you expect other provinces to be as open or more open, technically, because you're trying to keep your hands on supply management?
Well, let me give you an example as to how open our initiative really is. There are some jurisdictions that have proposed reciprocity. If you open for us, we'll open for you. Our de facto position is open, but that doesn't mean that we don't reserve the right to say no to certain products. Let me give you another example. There are some goods in the rest of Canada that if they were sold in Quebec would cause sanitation harm. For instance, there are some potatoes in other provinces that have diseases or that have been known to have diseases. Of course, we reserve the right to say that those types of seeds wouldn't be applicable in Quebec. So I think every jurisdiction, no matter where we look, has given themselves the option to have certain restrictions. We are going to have some restrictions, but what's really important to remember, Mike, and I think this is important for your listeners, is going to be to say that we have a de facto position of being open. That doesn't mean we're going to be unconditionally open. We're going to have some conditions, and every free trade agreement in the world has these types of limitations.
I wanted to talk about that meeting that is coming up next week between the Prime Minister and the Premiers. In the throne speech, Prime Minister Mark Carney has said that he wants to make Canada an energy superpower, both clean and conventional. So I know Premier Legault has talked a little bit about this, but I wanted to ask you, how willing is Quebec to be part of that when it comes to energy corridors, especially pipelines across your province?
Well, the Premier has made two conditions. The first one is to say that it takes social acceptability for us to move forward on any plan. But the second condition, of course, is that there be a plan. As of yet, we've not seen any plan, so we really can't speculate as to what may happen down the road. But the Premier did impose those two conditions.
But when you talk about social acceptability, how do you measure that going forward?
It means that people who are going to be concerned directly by any future project, should there be a project, are going to be consulted and that they buy in. Of course, when there isn't a project, it's hard to have the conversation, which is why I think we shouldn't be dealing in hypotheticals. We promised and we discussed and we've been already transparent with everybody that we will look at any project that is proposed. But until there is one, I think the question is moot. But of course, Quebec comes into this discussion with an openness and a willingness to listen. And when there's a project, we've committed to examining it.
I understand your point, but isn't this a bit of a chicken and the egg type of thing, that if no investor thinks that there would be acceptability inside the province of Quebec, why would they bother even trying to propose it? So don't you think that Quebec should be moving first here?
I think there's an onus on projects. There are people who are going to be promoting projects to tell us what their plans are. At that point, when we have something to actually consider, we can have the discussion. So I would say in the chicken and egg example that you're giving, we're the chicken. We need to see the egg.
Do you think that this will be one of the problems at the table next week when you consider that, of course, Alberta wants to move its energy east-west, and you also have the Prime Minister who is talking about these energy corridors? If there is still that type of feeling from the Quebec government, do you think that will hinder Prime Minister Carney's plan to have these energy corridors if the Quebec government continues to say, we'll put the plan on the table first, as opposed to saying we're open for business?
I think it's normal to want to see a plan, so I'm not sure that that's a non-starter. But the other thing that we should talk about is how collectively open we are. One of the things that I've noticed, I've had the file for interprovincial trade now for a few years. I have seen a lot of momentum in the past few months, triggered by what's going on south of the border. And I'm really, really confident that premiers and the Prime Minister are going to come together with concrete actions to help Canadians move, to make sure that we can have interprovincial trade, that we can reduce the barriers where possible. So my position is actually one of great optimism with the momentum that we've already generated. So no, I think I go into this meeting that the premiers are going to have with really, really high hopes, and I think everyone is of good will in this, just from the discussions that I've had with my colleagues from other provinces.
Okay, Minister, we're going to have to leave it there. Christopher Skeete, the Minister for the Economy in Quebec, thanks so much for joining us.
I appreciate it, Mike. Take care.